In the first 2 minutes of seeing someone you love, do not try to improve them in any way. If you greet everybody you love with corrections all the time, they feel like they're not good enough.
Today, we're going to look at the connection between our relationships and well being, and how staying in the room with someone when the topic is hard and the stakes are personal can not only improve our relationships, but help develop emotional agility and relational skills that we can carry into all aspects of our life. You'll leave with a way to slow down, get genuinely curious about where the other person is coming from, and say what's true for you without turning it into a fight. My guest today works at the intersection of research and storytelling, helping lead a growing media platform built around the question, what does it take for all of us to thrive? That same question anchors her podcast called, What Do You Mean by That? Rooted in her knowledge of and experience in positive psychology, life coaching, and social justice, she fuels change with compassion through panels, workshops, keynotes, and community building, and works to create the kind of inclusive space where real dialogue keeps driving action long after everyone has left. She's the author of Dear White Women, Let's Get Uncomfortable Talking About Racism, a practical and compassionate guide to understanding and dismantling racism at work, at home, and in your community, with a new book on the way that we'll talk about in a little bit. And she says the people you love are the cornerstone of a life well lived, and that even the conversation that you've been dreading can be the one that brings you closer. Oh, I can't wait to talk with her more about how to get there. I'm so delighted to be joined by
Sara Blanchard.
Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so excited to be here.
Okay, I want to jump right in. What is it that you build?
I like to say, I guess, that I'm building a different definition of what it means to live a good life. And I think I came to this point because, at least in my life, when I was in my early 20s, I had student loans to pay off. I took on a high paying job working at Goldman Sachs. And like I loved my family back home, but I was like, let me move across the world. I'm going to go do this in Tokyo and Hong Kong and work these 12+ hour days. And then one Saturday morning out there, my parents called and I was like, wait a second. When the other person on the other end of the line's voice is a little funny? I was like, "Where are you, Dad?" And I heard the beep beep of hospital machines in the background. And he died within a few weeks of that phone call.
Oh,
And as I was, mid-20s, he was, 59 years old. It kinda hit me on the plane back to Asia after his funeral that it's such an obvious truth, but we don't live forever. And so that began this process of like, okay, do I love what I'm doing right now? How do I figure out what it means to live a good life if we only have one life to live and we don't know how long it's going to be? And I stumbled onto life coaching and positive psychology, and we can talk all about that
yes.
um,
Love it.
through this conversation. But it was a personal journey for me, what started it, and now that I know how much science is behind it, I really wish that everybody knew this information so we could switch this definition of what we're chasing.
For you, what does it mean? Where have you gotten to on that idea of flourishing? What does a well-lived, flourishing life mean to you?
I mean, I think when you and I met at the Flourishing conference, an event, I talked about it like a plant in my office. I have this plant in my office. This is what I
It's
was talking
beautiful.
about. It's tremendous off screen, and with a flourishing life, you still have to pay attention to it. You have to water it. You have to make sure nutrients are being sprinkled into the soil. You're tending to the leaves. You're trimming it. Like it's not a life that's set it and forget it. It's a life that's paid, attention to, and that you look at the conditions that make things thrive. And so based on the science from what I have learned about all through the years, I think society has you believing that to live a good life, you got to chase the money, you got to chase the power, and for sure, we all need that, right? We need to be able to put food on our table. We'd love to have a roof over our heads and then some. Like I'd love to take trips or have some extra. But right after the Great Depression, so similarly coming out of a dark time, the Harvard Study for Adult Development tapped about a little over 700 undergraduates and started tracking them over the course of their entire lives. So this study is one of the longest running longitudinal studies in the world, and it's tracked people for over 80 years, over 2,000 people, and they've asked them consistently, tracking their all their physical statistics as well as surveys, asking them questions about what they feel about their life. And the overarching surprising takeaway was that people's satisfaction with how close their relationships were was the bigger predictor of their physical health than even their cholesterol was. And so this idea that people loved taking away their relationships, that when they when the common wisdom is like, you're on your deathbed, you're not like, "I wish I worked more." It's like, "I wish I was kinder to my kids," or had a like, it's about the relationships in our life. And so the science is there because
Yeah.
there's so many other studies about that, but I feel like it's sort of like cigarettes. Right, we knew in the 1950s that cigarettes were bad for us. That was when, like, the studies started showing it. I think it was in, like, the late 1990s that the government started restricting it, but it wasn't until the 2000s that actually, like, even on airplanes, smoking cigarettes was finally banned. Like, it took 50 years for proven science to trickle into our day-to-day lives, and so anything we can all do to spread this word so we don't have to wait 50 years for this science that, like, relationships are the cornerstone of our physical and mental long-term health and happiness, I would like to have all of us come and talk more about it.
So I'm curious from your perspective, like, let's say a listener is like, I want deeper relationships in my life. I want to strengthen these, but I feel like pulled and overwhelmed by maybe the state of my current to-do list and my reality at work. Maybe where would you start supporting someone in untangling some of that?
A lot of it comes back down to time, right? At the very end of the day, like, we're either like, you can chase monetary affluence, but the other thing we might wanna start chasing is time affluence. And it's something that I have built as a cornerstone of my life, but it's this idea of like, what we chase the money and sometimes get caught up in productivity because all of those times we check off, and I'm a checklist like fiend myself. I've been trying to wean myself off of that because every time you do that, you get a hit of dopamine.
It feels good.
It totally feels good, like, I did that, like, check, like, I wiped the counters off,
Yeah.
check, like, it just feels satisfying because we want control. It's very hard to feel like we live in this ambiguous, like, uncertain life where we don't know what to expect. I feel like the COVID pandemic, like, magnified that a trillionfold. It's why so many of us were baking bread because we had control over the
Sourdough
bread,
starter.
right? Like you have some tangible control over that. So you're dopamining yourself with the checklist. And then nowadays we have all the social media and you're getting your dopamine hits from like all the emails. Oh, I read that. Oh, I saw the new cat video. I got that. And we forget that things like taking a walk in nature or seeing a friend also release dopamine, but they can't compete with this level of rapid fire dopamine. And so the
Ah,
more we can slow down and build in a sense of space, we can then choose to respond instead of reacting to situations, right? And so whether it's the Japanese concept of yutori, where you show up to a place earlier so that you can just have a look around,
oh, I love that.
or for time affluence, like, and that's a concept going back to like the nerdy science stuff.
Yes.
Cassie Holmes, she wrote a book called The Happier Hour, and we all have the same amount of time in our day. But what she said was she introduced me to the concept of coffee dates with my kids,
Mm.
and was like, "Look, we can rush through the weekend, or we can say I only have a certain number of weekends left when my children are still under my roof, and spending that 1 hour and the $15, $20 is probably a lot cheaper over the course of that than I can't do the calculations right now, but, like, however many weekends it is and those hours, make the intentional space, claim the time for the people who are important to you because and then try to slow down, like, take off the mindless apps, like, we don't need to do it all. We need to get clear on what we stand for. So when people talk about work-life balance, I feel like and I'm doing sort of a scale motion, it's like work and life is on this teeter-totter kind of thing, and I don't see it like that. I see it more like our priorities, who we are, is inside this bubble that we can craft around ourselves, and it's this, like, rubber sheet that so other people's opinions and, like, energy and "you should do this" and the shoulds bounce off because we're airtight on what is important to us. So let's see if we can put our friendships, our family relationships, our healthier colleague relationships inside of that and do what it takes to nurture that instead of letting all of our energy seep out. And so to me, that's how I conceptualize time and work-life balance.
That is so beautiful and a perfect transition into this topic where I wanted to dive a little further into how to have hard conversations with someone that you love. And so, if relationships are so central to our happiness, to our well being, and some of the conversations feel full of landmines and challenges that it feels like if we step on, will explode the relationship or our own sense of self or something. So how do you help people in your work start to prepare for conversations? And what about when it's unexpected? Like
Ooh,
you weren't prepared for it to be a sudden. And I think that even the title of your podcast, what do you mean by that? That's a phrase that I've used in those moments.
yes. That's why we picked the title. We use it
when
too.
I'm thrown off, like I start there, but so maybe we can talk about that.
One of the things we don't talk enough about is how connected our minds and our bodies are, right? You have a psychologist and then a medical doctor, and you're just like, hang on. We are actually one unit. My brain definitely does not function independent of my body, and my body can't go anywhere without my brain. Can we get rid of this like false narrative that are two separate fields? The research is increasingly showing how much they're related. And you know this because the moment you hear somebody say something that's off or triggers you, what happens? You're like, "Ah," like, your whole body kinda goes like, "What?" And then you're maybe holding your breath or you feel a chest tight, like, you can sense it, right? You just know in your body almost before your brain can rationalize what it was that felt off about that certain situation. And so there's a ton of studies on this that I don't have to nerd out on if you don't want me to, but, like,
No,
I
we love research on the Building Thinkers podcast. Go wherever you would like.
okay. So let me go with the Pygmalion study because I want to talk about this other researcher in a bit where we're going. But a guy named Dr. Rosenthal wanted to understand like why things were different in tests. So and this was the second iteration of this test. He decided to go into with the an elementary school principal into a school and give kids a whole bunch of IQ tests. And so they all took these IQ tests, and then they told half of the teachers, or they told the teachers that half of these students were set to bloom. They were going to just grow academically in the next year. And the thing is, that these kids were randomly assigned. It had nothing to do with what their IQ tests were, but sure enough, when they went back at the end of the school year, those kids that the researchers had said were going to bloom actually did. They showed measurable improvements on their IQ tests when they were given them again. So what happened? It was the beliefs of the researchers that impacted how they showed up and physically manifested these beliefs and treated the kids more gently. They gave them more nurturing words, warmer, tone. Like their IQ score increased by 27 points. Like it wasn't an insignificant amount, regardless of how they scored initially on an average, right? So, like research like this continues to show that our beliefs impact how we act, and so let me go back to, like, the shocking moment. You're usually gonna go, "What did they say?" And you hold your breath, right? At least I do.
Yeah.
So, we know that our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system gets activated if you can take a breath in, but then hold it and then take a longer breath out. We can signal to our bodies that we're safer and that we can actually show up with a little bit more presence. So, like, notice what your body is doing in that moment. Check how you're actually feeling. Like if you're feeling triggered or threatened, like get familiar with where certain sense if you're angry, like what do all of these things feel in your body so that you know not to like lash back out with defensiveness or anger, like that you can actually show up and give yourself that moment to pause and show up with curiosity. So
Mm.
I think that's is number 1 is like at the very least, like know that if you believe, "Oh, wow, they said something racist, or they said something sexist, or they said something offensive," you're gonna probably come out as, like, angry when if you wanna give the person the benefit of the doubt because you love them and you are like, "What? I'm very confused." You can take that pause in your body and give yourself that, like, separation to not just lash back out, but you can choose to respond. So I would say, like, just remember that our minds and bodies are connected, and like, give yourself that space to just be.
It reminds me of the, like, Viktor Frankl separation between the stimulus and the response,
Yes.
and our area of control is the space between those. Like, we cannot control that the stimulus happened, but we can like, it's that space between where we can choose the response.
Yes, and the more going back to our earlier conversation that you've gotten accustomed to building in a little bit more time affluence, that you're not used to rushing from one thing to another, you can then give yourself that like just it only takes a moment, but it's this consistent shift towards it doesn't all have to happen immediately. You don't have to lash out. Nothing has to get solved exactly in this moment. Because oftentimes too, if you think about it, hard conversations with people that you love aren't going to be a one and done. Right? Like if you're having a conversation with your, say, teenager, as I am in my house, you know, it's not like, "Hey, please clean your room," and boom, it's solved forever, right? Like it's a constant reminder. These are cyclical things. Like you have to figure out how to be um centering the relationship while you discuss the hard thing.
Yeah. I have a little parenting affirmation that I say to myself that I really try, especially when I come if I'm working from home and I'm coming downstairs, there's not really a long enough commute for me to switch from, like, consultant Tracy to parent Tracy. So I say, like, "Connect before correct." And I try that, and, I've talked recently with them about how it feels activating for me when I come downstairs and there's, like, a giant mess of things because that's what I see first, that, like,
Mhm.
visual, and so I have to intentionally recenter myself to say connect with them before starting to be overly directive mom saying clean everything up before I've said, "How are you? How's your day? Like, do you wanna play Legos?"
I love that you do that. So Dr. Amit Sood, who has one of the global leaders in resilience, he has a thing called the 2-minute rule. And it's in the first 2 minutes of seeing someone you love, do not try to improve them in any way. And you're like, wait, if you sit with that for a second, you're like, how often after your partner comes down or like, wait, did you get the milk from the store that I asked you to get? Or like, hey kid, did you get your homework done? Like when are you gonna sit down to do that? So
I'm gonna
it's
have to
take 2
write
minutes.
those words down specifically, and then I believe I'm going to get a link to my own episode from my husband in which he has clipped this part, and he has said, "Did you hear what Sarah said?" Writing it down.
It changed how I interact with my family because his point is, look, if you greet everybody you love with corrections all the time, they feel like they're not good enough. That you want to create this space where you're just overjoyed to see them. They wake up in the morning, you drop everything and go to them, be like, "It's so good to see you." They come home from school, "Wow, I'm so happy that you're here." They place a phone call, "Great to hear your voice." Like, how can you lead with that love and acceptance so they don't have to constantly prove themselves? And fall into this checklist trap that we are talking about, right? Like, I have to do this, and this in order for mom to
Yeah.
think that I've done enough, and that probably applies in all scenarios.
Sarah, you have just life coached me. I appreciate it. It seems like such a small thing, but it's a huge shift to your point because it signals to those you love that the love comes first and the desire for connection. And I recognize in my own, like, it's my own stuff for why I do that, my own sense of control and desire for progress. And from a good place, like if I give myself grace, like a desire for growth and momentum, but does it have to be in the first 2 minutes? Because they do need to pick up the shoes or whatever eventually, and we do have routines for this that are not always being met, but is that the starting point? Is that what's most important? Absolutely not.
Yes, and I think we all do, right? Like, and
Yeah.
we forget because when we're in a rush, when we are like, "We gotta get it done right now," like, "I don't like this." But I think this leads me to the second point, which is something that I learned from Dr. Ellen Langer. We got to interview her a couple of times actually recently, and she's the mother of mindfulness. So anything you've heard about mindfulness, she's the reason it has started. She's been researching mindfulness for like 50 years. She has done so many of the major studies that show us about mind body connection and everything else. But what she said blew my mind and it shifted things for me. She said, every action makes sense from the perspective of the person doing it. And I was like, oh, so my kids aren't just trying to piss me off all the time. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, they don't, obviously not. But there are times where you're like, I don't understand why you're doing this. And then you go, there's a reason. Like, as soon as I shifted that, it shifted from me feeling like I knew best and that I could help them to like, wow, they have agency. They are fully formed humans already with their own thoughts and patterns and desires and values and skills, and I can respect them first. Like, it really shifted my relationship with them. And that, I think was the start of what we talked about curiosity. When my daughter was going into 4th grade, she came to us over the summer, said, "I love being a good student, mom, but math is just, like, getting really hard. Can I get a tutor?" And I'm like, "What kid asks for a tutor? But sure, like, let's do this." And so we got a tutor, but over the course of the next school year, she kept, like, skipping what I thought were easy math problems and then, like, slouching at the table and then not doing the homework, and I'm like, "What is going on?" And I kept being mean, to be honest, because I thought I knew better, and I was like, "You're not working hard enough. You gotta sit here. Let's get it done. I'm gonna teach you along with the tutor." And then eventually, over the course of the year, the tutor came waving a flag being like, "I think something else is going on."
Hmm.
And then she's like, "There's this thing called dyscalculia. It's a math learning difference." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I am the biggest jerk of a parent ever." Like, I really did not know that this existed. I didn't know that math learning differences existed. And I had steamrolled my kid who said she was doing her best, who said she was trying. And I interpreted her actions as, like, I used fundamental attribution error, right? Like, if I had been frustrated by something, I would have been like, "I wonder what's going on." But for her, I was like, "Oh, I think she might be lazy. She's not working hard enough." Instead of saying, "Wow, something might be going on for her. I wonder what it is," and getting curious. And
Oh,
so I really recommend, if you see people doing stuff that's triggering you, look for not in your own brain, but other explanations. And so because of that realization, ever since that, at their dinner table, as kids get older, they'll be like, "So and so came to school with dirty jeans again and they smell," or whatever. And it's like, well, what else might be going on for them? Like, let's make it a practice in all of our everyday lives to ask questions like, what other explanation, what reasonable explanation might there be? Because it's not just the ones that we assume.
one connection that you helped me make with the reason behind is comes from some of my backgrounds in early childhood neurodiversity. And one of the things we would always ask when there was some sort of behavior happening in the classroom is what was the antecedent to the behavior? Like what happened before, like the student with special needs bit somebody, like what happened before? These are like young kids. And it's I think we do this maybe more naturally with, like, toddlers, like, "Oh, you might be hungry. Oh," but thinking about adolescents, what is going on behind it? What is the narrative that they are hearing based on the algorithm that's making them think in a certain way, that makes them say a certain thing that I then react to, right? This whole cycle. What's the antecedent? There's this idea that, people are doing the best that they can. So, Sarah, I think what's maybe a little bit of a hard question. What about in those instances where they're not doing the best they can? What if our kid is being lazy and not having the work ethic? How do we separate out those if it starts with curiosity and intention? What if we find that they really can do it and they're being lazy? I'll give that as an example. Or they have been misinformed by information that's causing them to say things. Like, is it our role to undo that misinformation?
I think there's one thing that I think everyone, whether they read the book or go watch the TED Talk, but Charles Duhigg's Super Communicators talks about the 3 types of conversations we all wanna have, and it's either the practical conversation, like, the logistics, the, like, "Let's solve this problem," kind of, like, practical, and then you have an emotional conversation, like, "How do I feel about this situation?" Like, I just need to be validated. I feel whatever way, and I just need someone to see that I'm feeling this way. And then there's the social conversation where it's like revealing my values and like who I am. And so we may not always be having the same conversation that we think we are with the other person. So it's the way that we get there is by asking a more profound question, right? You could ask, "What do you mean by that?" Or you could, as opposed to just living at the superficial level, right, of, like, they said that hurtful comment, and as opposed to, like, jumping right back in and saying something, you could be like, "What do you mean by that?" Or, I wonder, like, what led you to say that? Or, how because then maybe they could say, "Well, I'm really afraid of blah, blah, blah." And then they wanna talk about how they feel, and then maybe you can talk about the facts. Or, like, you can just sort of see where people are at in terms of their desire for the conversation at that moment by asking a deeper question. So that, like, core idea from Charles Duhigg's work was really powerful.
I love
Um,
that.
because how many times also if you've seen this YouTube video of, have you seen It's Not the Nail?
Oh, yes, yeah, is it like there's the nail in the head?
Yes.
Yes,
And,
yes.
like and she's just like, "It's not about the nail." Like, she's like, "Don't solve the problem, it's about how I'm feeling." Like, it's such a like, hilarious encapsulation of this idea of we don't always need to solve the problem. And oftentimes, if people are venting or they're talking about stuff, sometimes we just need to hold space for them. Now, if we're talking about misinformation, first, misinformation and, like, false news, these are really politicized terms. And so I think if we switch the words to say something like inaccurate or misleading, it's better than misinformation. Like, you should really be clear on what you're saying, to the person, and sort of take the politicization out of it, is what I learned from the people who do, the Ad Fontes Media, who has, like, the media bias charts and all that sort of stuff. And the other thing is, you know, you're gonna probably feel away in your body. So, like, go back to that breathing to calm yourself down so that you're ready to understand. Because when you're in that situation, like, if you're just gonna bite back at the facts, there's gonna be like, it's gonna be this back and forth argument. Going back to it, there's a reason they're saying what they're saying. And so how do we give ourselves that physical pause, breathe out, calm our body, turn on our prefrontal cortex so that we can get curious as opposed to furious, and ask them, like, more questions to understand. So truly, what do you mean by that comment that you just threw out there? Acknowledge what they're saying. I hear that. I feel like you're saying blah blah blah. Check your understanding of what they're saying. Ask some more follow up questions. Like, really try to get at the core of what it is that they are concerned about, what it is that they're understanding, right? And then see if you can find an area that you agree on. Because I think even during the days of the pandemic, for example, and this might be, like, well dated by now because I don't feel like many people wear masks anymore, but there was a lot of heated stuff about masks.
Yeah.
And, like, you should wear a mask, you shouldn't wear a mask. It depends on, like, what state you're in and, like, what political circles you're in. But at the end of the day, we could all agree that the disruption caused by the pandemic was awful, and we all wanted everyone to feel better, right? Like, you could find those areas of agreement. So find that because you wanna connect on a human level, and remember that connection that you have with that person first, because you're gonna be less likely to viciously attack them, to say some irreparable things. You're gonna remember that you are in this relationship, that you love this person. So again, whether it's whatever similarity, you're both women, you're a parent, you value hard work, you like entrepreneur, whatever that thing is, find that commonality because you're gonna listen to someone better when you feel respected, and they'll listen to you better when they feel respected.
I think that creating space to have conversations, like, let's just say even in the workplace of, like, a non-political type conversation, but just there's a difference of opinion in how to get work done, for example, or there's something like there's an elephant in the room, but no one is saying it. I have found, and part of this is, like, in my consulting role, it's part of my job to come in and help unearth some of that, and I have found even in the past couple months, a couple people, like, after a meeting wrote me, like, a thank you note about the meeting saying, "This was such a good meeting." And I paused and looked back and said that the reason why I believe they're saying that, and I asked some follow-up questions, is because of this idea of good controversy, that I was not allowing things to be unsaid that needed to be said in the space, because that was part of the purpose of the meeting, is not just to say, "Check, status update," but to really unearth the challenges and then give people that were doing the work the voice to speak up, and I had a little bit of political coverage myself in my role to just give them that space. So I am struck by this idea, we're talking about relationships and the connection between relationships and well-being. I am seeing the value in the workplace in these human relationships where people are saying, like I feel more connected. I feel more like I can do this work and more inspired and motivated even in different words because I simply had the space to say the hard thing. And I'm wondering, is this kind of part of the central point of why having hard conversations deepens relationships on the other side, or anything more about that if it resonates?
I mean, we all universally need to feel like we matter, right? At the end of the day, that is like a fundamental human need is to feel like you have value and have something to contribute. And when we take that away from people, when we feel like they can't contribute, when they don't add something, they can't be known, then it is bad for our psyche and it's bad for our work. Like it's bad for the workplace, it's bad for everything. And so, yes, I think the same way you do the hard thing by going to the gym and you lift weights and like it's not easy, but you're slowly destroying your muscles in order to rebuild them. Like that's what we're doing is like we're really like we're doing the hard thing by having these conversations and exposing ourselves. But the more we do that and the more we know how to hold those conversations, both having them, like sharing them and listening to them, the easier and easier it gets. And we're creating spaces for people to feel like they can be known, that they can contribute and be seen. And so I feel like yes, absolutely, it is critical. And there's maybe you in your work you've come across Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, but like that idea of like I feel something and I need blank, and so I'd like you to consider whatever it is. I mean, I think this structure of like owning that I am feeling a way. You can't really argue with how I feel. Stating your needs, like basically instead of making the problem the other person's, it's about our reaction, right? It's because the other person said this awful comment or there's some unspoken stuff and it comes up, you could say, well, you're wrong. You have this awful view, whatever. But it's not that. It's actually my reaction to that. That's the problem. And so, how can I be better at expressing my needs and sharing my stuff? And the more we can be practiced in communicating in that way, it'll be received as well. Yes, this for sure important in being seen and creating a deeper relationships because then you're known, you know?
Sarah, one of the questions that we like to ask is a sentence stem. If only people knew. And so, how would you fill in that sentence stem when it comes to these conversations around relationships and having hard conversations?
I think if only people knew that different, it doesn't mean deficient, whether it's opinions or in people and differences, right? Um, in our forthcoming book, we have a comparison to wildflowers. You'd never walk around this beautiful field of flowers that are tall and small and different colors and shapes and be like, that one looks different than what I expected. Like, it's totally wrong, right? It's really only when we add judgment to difference and differences of opinion that it becomes a problem. And in reality, we can't judge what's right or wrong because everything is uncertain. Ellen Langer also gave us this example of like when you ask people 1 plus 1, what's the answer? You'd say 2, right? But what happens if you have one pile of laundry and another pile of laundry and you combine them? It's just one big pile of laundry. Or one cloud and another cloud and you add them and it's 2. So if 1 plus 1 isn't always 2, how can you be certain of anything else in this world? Right? Like everything is uncertain. And so if we can work to remove the judgment, lead with curiosity, create the space in our lives to have that, we can see that different isn't deficient. It just is something that we need to learn more about.
Sarah, that's beautiful. Is there anything else that we haven't hit on yet around this topic that you want to share? Like anything else that comes up often in your work or in your relationships that you've been learning?
One of the things I would say that we probably don't spend enough time on is spending the pre-work, like the time to ask ourselves what we need, to know ourselves, our own biases, our own triggers ahead of time so we can be more mindful. Like for you, you said when you leave and you go downstairs and there's shoes everywhere, it like triggers you. Okay. Well, how can you spend some time inquiring? Like, does that for you feel like that's something that they're not respecting that you need peace? Is it like a respecting? Is it a visual like, now it's more stuff on my to do? Like just understanding, taking the space to like, what gets me and why? If we know more about ourselves in honesty, then we can sort of pull back those triggers and be more aware when they come up because then it doesn't surprise us as much.
Sarah, I know that you have a forthcoming book. Will you tell our listeners about it?
Yes, I'm super, super excited about it. It's called Different, The Joyful Survival Guide for Parents of One-of-a-Kind Teens, and it's co-written with Dr. Kelly Harding, who is a psychiatrist out of New York City. She's a leading expert on kindness. She is a professor at Columbia. She is incredible as a human, and it's also the parent to different teenagers. And it's the book we really wish we had when we were starting out this journey, actually just raising kids, let alone teenagers, because there's just not much based in positive psychology when the rubber meets the road for people who don't meet this air quote normal model of humanity, which quite frankly doesn't exist. Right? Like
Right.
there's no normal human. We're all one of a kind. And so I'm really thrilled about this. It comes out in March of 2027. And it is like a lot of our stories. We did a ton of research, interviewed a lot of folks and experts in the field, as well as parents of different kids and different kids themselves. And so, hopefully, people who are living this journey, if you and your child feel different. So it's coming out.
Okay, and where can people find your podcast or learning more about you and any other connection points?
Yes, my website is sarablanchard.com. That's Sarah without an H, blanchard.com. And the podcast is What Do You Mean by That? You can find it on any podcast platform. It used to be called Dear White Women, so you'll see a transition where we rebranded about a year ago. But we've had this show for over 7 years now, and we've had the pleasure and honor to interview a ton of folks. So there's lots of learning on there.
Wonderful. Sarah, I feel like we could have so many additional conversations. And so I'm so excited to be connected. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. I think our guests are really going to have an opportunity to go deep into these topics and hopefully experiment with some of the tools that you've given us, the questions that you've given us, even if they hadn't kind of heard this idea before, what do you mean by that? I hope they go deeper and try that question, explore your podcast and your work. But thank you so much for coming together today and sharing your insights. I'm really excited for our listeners.
Thank you so, so much for having me. I love your work, and I'm so glad you're doing this.
If you want to keep reflecting on this episode, subscribe to the Building Thinkers newsletter, where I share a blueprint for thought to help you turn insight into action. And if this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone else who you think might enjoy it, or leave a quick rating or review. That helps more thinkers find their way here. And in the meantime, let's continue to build thinkers.